I went to the northeast of the city to see where Richard and Mildred lived in exile. It was a difficult chapter in their relationship. Forced out of their home state, the Lovings came to live here, Neal Street in Washington, D.C. It's one of the poorer parts of the city now, and it would have been then. The colour in the Lovings' relationship gave them few options. They didn't like it here. Mildred in particular really struggled with the idea of being away from her family. And 4 years after moving in, she wrote a letter to the then Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, and he passed it on to the American Civil Liberties Union. And that proved to be a turning point in the Lovings' story. Two young lawyers took on the case of their careers. It was Bernie Cohen who first replied to Mildred's letter.
We have 3 children and cannot afford an attorney. We wrote to the Attorney General. He suggested that we get in touch with you for advice. Please help us if you can. Hope to hear from you real soon. Yours truly, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Loving. And it was that simple letter that got us into this not-so-simple case.
I remember it very clearly. I met them in an office in Washington, D.C., because I could not ask them to come into my office in Alexandria, Virginia. They would have been breaking the law, and we were not interested in getting them arrested again.
Then Bernie Cohen teamed up with Phil Hirschkopf.
They were so different visually. To look at Mr. Loving, he truly had a red neck and short cropped hair. He looked like a Southerner you expect to be against civil rights, visually.
They were a very simple couple, very unpretentious, certainly not civil rights firebrands. Their only interest was in being allowed to move back into Virginia.
Mrs. Loving was so demure and soft-spoken, it was hard to picture them together. And yet, in this stress of litigation, you see people objecting and reasoning, and they never differed in front of us. I don't believe they differed outside of our presence either. They were in complete accord. There was an amazing bond between the two of them.
At no fee, the two attorneys reopened the case in the Virginia courts. Ironically, another defeat in Bazile's county court, followed by further disappointment in the Virginia Supreme Court, allowed the Lovings and their legal team to make a much bigger impact.
Remember, these statutes we were attacking were statutes to preserve racial integrity, to preserve the purity of the blood. That's how they were termed in the official language.
The term miscegenation was coined in 1863 to refer specifically to the intermarriage of blacks and whites. It became a loaded buzzword of its time, but it stuck. Virginia led the way in 1662 when anti-miscegenation laws came into effect. As the years passed, the bans on interracial marriages spread to these states in red. At its height in 1947, no fewer than 30 states outlawed mixed marriages. By the time of the Supreme Court decision, 16 states, including Virginia, still had the legislation. New York was one of the more progressive states. It never passed such a law. Otherwise, my parents' situation would have been very different. Leonard and I continued our journey back to my roots. We left Manhattan and ventured over the Brooklyn Bridge to try to locate where my parents settled in the early 70s. It wasn't easy to find, as I had no memory of the place at all.
I don't know how we missed Adam Street. We came over.
But when we finally pulled up, judging by the photos, it had hardly changed. So that's my mum, and that's me. That's us back in 1974, obviously with some friends of ours.
Look, you're tiny.
No, sweeter than I am now.
Yeah, your mum looks really happy.
I was born to a black mum and a white dad, a mixed-race child in a changing country, where many states would have imprisoned my parents only a few years beforehand. A few years, but a different era. That era was one of upheaval for the Lovings. One of Richard's closest friends was Raymond Green, seen here on the right with the couple back in the 60s. They raced stock cars together in a time when a black and white team was unheard of. Green still lives in Central Point, just down the road from Mildred Loving. He remembers the bond between the couple.
They was perfect for each other, you know. They never Never got into no arguments. They never had no problems. But he really thought the world of her.
These two people found each other, and despite what the legal system did to them, they were lucky that the years they had together, they were so much in tune with each other. They were just, you sensed it, you felt it, you observed it when you were around them. They just really loved each other, they really trusted each other.
The Lovings also placed their trust in Cohen and Hirschkopf to get them back home to Virginia, but it was a long battle.
I told them this case is going to end up in the Supreme Court of the United States. Richard's jaw just dropped in amazement. He shook his head. He could not understand why I could not just go to Judge Bazile and ask the judge to let them come back into Virginia.
They took the case right to the top of America's legal system. History was about to be made, but Richard Loving's message was a simple one.
We had asked them to come hear the argument before the Supreme Court, and they said they did not want to do it. And I said to Richard Loving while he was sitting in my office with Mildred, I said, "Is there anything you want me to say to the court?" Which was really an unusual thing because, we're talking about asking a lay person, does he want me to say something to the 9 honored Supreme Justices of the United States? And he said, just tell the court I love my wife. And I did.
We say that the prevention of interracial marriage is a legitimate exercise of state power.
These laws, Your Honors, are ludicrous in their inception and equally ludicrous in their application. Subject to immediate arrest under the fornication statute and the lewd and lascivious cohabitation statute.
That is the right of Richard and Mildred Loving to wake up in the morning or to go to sleep at night, knowing that the sheriff will not be knocking on their door or shining a light in their face in the privacy of their bedroom.
A period when the Klan rode openly in the South. And that's when he talked about bastardy of the races, and miscegenation, and amalgamation, and race suicide became the watchword.
From the psychosociological point of view, interracial marriages are detrimental to the individual, to the family, and to society.
These laws rob the Negro race of their dignity. It's the worst part of these laws, and that's what they're meant to do, to hold the Negro class in a lower position, lower social position, a lower economic position.
The prohibition of interracial marriage, for this reason, stands on the same footing as the prohibition of polygamous marriage or incestuous marriage, or the proscription of minimum ages at which people may marry, and the prevention of the marriage of people who are mentally incompetent.
You have before you today what we consider the most odious of the segregation laws and the slavery laws. And our view of this law, and we hope to clearly show, is that this is slavery.
No one can articulate it better than Richard Loving when he said to me, Mr. Cohen, tell the court I love my wife, and it is just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia.
So they didn't know when they got married, but Richard and Mildred Loving would have to come here, to the highest court in the land, just to win the right to live together as a married couple. It took up 9 years of their lives, but this crucial landmark ruling would lay the path for the next generation of mixed-race couples to live freely in every state in America.